The scent of old paper and leather, of dust motes dancing in sunbeams through leaded glass. That was the air I breathed, the very essence of my soul. For 50 years, my life had been a quiet tapestry woven with the threads of history. Philadelphia was more than just a city to me. It was a living archive, and I, Samuel, a professor of history, considered myself one of its most devoted custodians. My particular passion lay in the preservation of its lesser-known, yet deeply significant, historical sites, believing that each stone, each faded deed, held a piece of our collective truth. And nowhere was that truth more profoundly embodied than in my own family home, a Federalist-era house on a quiet tree-lined street, a silent sentinel that had witnessed generations unfold within its sturdy walls. It wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a testament to endurance, a repository of stories. It was my last refuge. But that refuge, that truth, had been under siege for years. The slow, insidious erosion of my peace began not with a bang, but with a whisper, Victoria's whisper, weaving through our dinner conversations, seeping into the quiet corners of our shared life. She was my wife, a woman of striking ambition and undeniable drive, a property developer whose vision for the future seemed always to involve tearing down the past. In the beginning, her vivacity had been intoxicating, a vibrant counterpoint to my more scholarly, introspective nature. She was dynamic, a whirlwind of ideas and connections, and I, perhaps foolishly, saw in her a partner who could bring a different kind of energy to my world. She made me feel alive, relevant beyond the confines of dusty archives. Our early days were a blur of shared laughter, late-night conversations where she'd listen, seemingly captivated, as I spoke of colonial artisans or revolutionary fervor. She'd nod, her eyes sparkling, and I'd mistake that sparkle for genuine interest, not the glint of a keen mind calculating potential. The first red flags were subtle, almost imperceptible. A dismissive wave of her hand when I'd proudly show her a newly acquired antique map. A casual comment about the quaintness of my academic pursuits, often delivered with a patronizing smile that I initially interpreted as affection. She'd hint at her own frustrations, how her projects often faced unnecessary hurdles from sentimental preservationists. I'd laugh it off, thinking she was just letting off steam. We were different, yes, but wasn't that the spice of life? Then came the house. Our house. My family's house. It began with gentle suggestions. Samuel, darling, this old place is a money pit. The roof, the plumbing, the taxes. Think of the burden. We could sell it, move into something modern, something that reflects our success. She'd talk about unlocking its potential, about maximizing our assets. I'd counter, trying to explain the irreplaceable value, the historical provenance, the sheer beauty of its craftsmanship. But she'd just sigh, a sound that always managed to convey both pity and exasperation. Her words were always laced with what seemed like genuine concern for my financial well-being, our future. It made me feel selfish for wanting to cling to what I saw as heritage, and she framed my passion as a flaw, an inability to adapt, to grow. The pressure mounted gradually, like a slow-moving tide creeping up a beach. What began as suggestions evolved into persistent campaigns, each one chipping away at my resolve. Every leak, every creak of the old floorboards, every utility bill became a weapon in her arsenal. She'd point out the rising property values in our neighborhood, the prime opportunity this land represented for commercial development. Think, Samuel, she'd say, her voice a smooth blend of logic and persuasive charm. How much good could we do with that kind of capital? You could fund your own research, travel the world, no longer tied down by this archaic structure. She painted a picture of liberation, while simultaneously framing my commitment to the house as a burden on her, on our shared future. Her constant belittling of my work stung, deep and true. My lectures, my meticulous archival research, my passionate advocacy for historical sites. All of it was reduced to dusty old books, living in the past, impractical hobbies. She'd introduce me at parties as my sweet, scholarly husband, Samuel, who lives happily in the 18th century. A playful jab that always felt like a public dismissal of my entire being. I started to feel disoriented, questioning my own values. Was I truly holding us back? Was my passion just a childish indulgence? The incessant psychological pressure was relentless. I'd find myself staring at the intricate carving above the fireplace, a piece of history I cherished, and for a fleeting, horrifying moment, I'd see it through her eyes. Merely an old, decaying structure, an obstacle to progress. My sleep grew fractured, haunted by the imagined sound of wrecking balls. My appetite waned, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. What truly destabilized me was when Charles, my longtime colleague and research partner, began to pull away. Charles and I had shared countless hours poring over maps, debating architectural styles, and fighting side by side for the preservation of overlooked historical gems across the city. He understood, implicitly, my reverence for the past. But then, he started missing our usual coffee meetings. His emails became curt, and his once enthusiastic responses to my latest discoveries grew muted. When I'd bring up the fight for our house, his eyes would dart away, a strange discomfort settling over him. He'd offer vague platitudes about market forces and progress, echoing Victoria's rhetoric in a way that made my blood run cold. It was a subtle shift, but to me, it felt like the ground beneath my feet was crumbling. The true moment of sickening realization, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your vision blur, came slowly, then all at once. Victoria started referencing expert opinions that conveniently countered every historical claim I made about our home. The house, she insisted, was not genuinely Federal-era, but a later reconstruction with some period elements. Its connection to a prominent abolitionist family, a fact I had meticulously documented, was dismissed as unsubstantiated folklore. Each time, she'd present these claims with an air of absolute certainty, as if she were merely stating undeniable facts. When I tried to argue, presenting my own evidence, she'd simply wave her hand, a practiced gesture of dismissal. Samuel, you're just too close to it. Your sentimentality clouds your judgment. I've consulted with actual experts, unbiased professionals who see things objectively. The word unbiased stuck in my craw. Who were these experts? She remained vague, simply saying she had her sources. But a seed of dread had been planted. One evening, I was walking past her home office, the door slightly ajar. I heard her voice, low and conspiratorial. Charles, are you sure about this? The report needs to be watertight. Samuel's going to fight tooth and nail. My heart seized in my chest. Charles, my Charles, the man who had shared my passion, my intellectual sparring partner, my friend. He was her expert. I felt a cold dread spread through my veins, a slow, sickening realization that went beyond mere betrayal. It was a deep, pervasive feeling of being targeted, systematically dismantled. I replayed every conversation, every evasive glance from Charles, every dismissive comment from Victoria. It was all a meticulously orchestrated campaign to undermine my credibility, to delegitimize my life's work, to steal my heritage. The gaslighting was so complete that I started to question everything. Was I truly a naive academic, blind to the realities of the world? Had my research been flawed all along? Was my connection to the house merely a sentimental delusion? My own memories felt fluid, unreliable. I'd paced the quiet halls of our home, touching the worn banister, tracing the faint outline of a child's drawing on a hidden corner of the wall, desperate to reconnect with the tangible proof of its history and my own sanity. The climax of this carefully orchestrated assault was the public hearing, a crucible designed, I now understood, to burn away my last vestiges of hope. The city council chambers were packed. Local preservationists, a few of my loyal students, and a smattering of curious residents filled the seats. Victoria, ever the public persona, had mobilized an impressive contingent of supporters from the development community. I sat at a small table, my meticulously prepared binders of historical documents and architectural surveys stacked before me, my hands trembling slightly as I clutched my opening statement. I had poured my entire being into proving the house's significance, not just to me, but to the city, to history itself. Victoria took the podium first, her tailored suit impeccable, her smile radiant yet cutting. She spoke with practiced ease, painting a vision of progress, of modernization, of economic revitalization. She presented a glossy rendering of a sleek new commercial complex that would stand where my home had stood for centuries. My jaw clenched, my knuckles white. Then, with a dramatic flourish, she announced, and to substantiate our claims, we have commissioned an independent historical assessment from one of Philadelphia's most respected architectural historians, Dr. Charles Hawthorne. My breath hitched. Charles. He walked forward, his posture rigid, his face devoid of the warmth I had known for decades. He carried a slim binder, starkly different from my own weighty volumes. He began to speak, his voice professional, measured, clinical. He dismissed the House's Federal-era claims as stylistic imitations common in later periods of revival, minimizing its architectural significance. He then dissected my carefully documented links to the abolitionist movement, calling them tenuous at best, based on anecdotal evidence rather than verifiable records. He presented his findings, concluding that the home's historical value was negligible and that the land was ideally suited for commercial development, aligning with the city's forward-thinking economic agenda. Each word was a dagger, twisting in the wound of his betrayal. When it was my turn to speak, my voice felt alien, thick with unshed tears and a sudden, profound exhaustion. I tried to present my counter-arguments, my evidence, my passion. I spoke of the unique hand-cut bricks, the original foundation, the documented lineage of ownership, the rediscovered letters of the abolitionist family tucked away in archives. I felt like I was screaming into a void. Halfway through my plea, Victoria, from her seat, cut me off, her voice ringing out across the quiet chamber. Samuel, she declared, her tone laced with a mixture of pity and exasperation. Your sentimentality isn't enough to stop progress. We cannot allow personal attachment to impede the future of our city. And then, Charles, my old friend, turned his head, caught my eye, and offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod of agreement towards Victoria. It was a silent affirmation of her assault, a final, public validation of everything she had done to me. In that moment, the room spun. The faces blurred. The air left my lungs. The ground gave way. I wasn't just losing my home. I was losing my identity, my life's work, my faith in truth itself. My voice trailed off. I sat down, my hands lifeless in my lap, feeling the weight of centuries of history crumble into dust around me. The vote was a formality. I lost. My home was slated for demolition. The world went silent, then crashed down around me. I don't remember leaving the council chambers, only the sensation of my legs moving, heavy and disconnected, leading me back to a house that was no longer mine. The next few weeks, perhaps months, are a blur of profound grief and numbness. I retreated into myself, the vibrant historian replaced by an empty shell. I walked the familiar rooms, touching the walls, feeling the ghosts of my ancestors, and wept. Not just for the house, but for the man I thought I was, for the life I believed I had. My marriage, of course, imploded. There was no confrontation, no dramatic argument left in me. The trust was utterly shattered, replaced by a chasm of betrayal that could never be bridged. I simply existed in a haze of sorrow, the taste of ashes perpetually in my mouth. Days bled into nights. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping properly. My university lectures became rote, my passion extinguished. I felt like a shipwreck survivor, cast adrift in an ocean of despair, no land in sight. My mind replayed Victoria's words, Charles's nod, the collective dismissal of my life's purpose. Who was I without my history, without my home, without my truth? I felt stripped bare, exposed, utterly worthless. The very foundation of my identity, built on scholarship and integrity, had been publicly ridiculed and destroyed by the people closest to me. But then, slowly, agonizingly, something shifted. Perhaps it was the sheer exhaustion of grief, or the quiet resilience that scholarly pursuit had unknowingly instilled in me. A flicker of anger, cold and steady, began to replace the despair. Anger at Victoria's ruthless ambition, at Charles's spineless betrayal. Anger at myself for having been so blind, so trusting. This anger, unlike the grief, had a sharp edge, a clarity that started to cut through the fog. I had lost the house, yes, but I had not lost my intellect. I had not lost my dedication to truth. One morning, I woke up with an unfamiliar resolve. My hands, which had been idle for so long, yearned for the weight of a pen, the feel of paper. I realized then what I had to do. I couldn't save that house, but I could fight for the truth that Victoria and Charles had so brazenly distorted. I would expose the manipulation, the corporate greed masquerading as progress. My grief began to transform into purpose. The first step was to leave, truly leave. I packed a single suitcase, leaving behind decades of a life that felt like a carefully constructed illusion. Walking out of that house for the last time, the key heavy in my hand, was like severing a limb. It hurt, an unbearable agony, but it was also the first breath of air I had taken in what felt like an eternity. I found a small apartment near campus, sterile and new, a stark contrast to the venerable old home I'd left behind. It was lonely, yes, but it was my loneliness, untainted by the presence of a manipulator. The healing process was slow, arduous, but the act of writing became my therapy, my redemption. I poured every ounce of my scholarly rigor, every shard of my broken heart, into a new project. It wasn't just a book. It was a meticulous reconstruction of the truth, a detailed expose of the historical manipulations, the corporate interests, the ethical breaches that had led to the demolition of my home and threatened countless other historical sites. I painstakingly documented Charles's misrepresentations, cross-referencing his expert claims with verifiable archives, exposing the holes in his fabricated narrative. I detailed Victoria's network, her financial gains, her disregard for heritage. It was an intellectual battle, fought not with arguments in a council chamber, but with facts on a page. I worked ceaselessly, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. The book, tentatively titled The Last Refuge, a tale of greed, truth, and the erasure of history, became my new life. It was a raw, honest account, steeped in the academic rigor I had always upheld, yet infused with the emotional weight of my personal experience. When it was finally published, the reception was beyond anything I could have imagined. It struck a nerve. My narrative, backed by irrefutable evidence, resonated deeply with the public. It sparked widespread debate, generating headlines and capturing the attention of historians, activists, and ordinary citizens alike. The book gained recognition not just for its academic merit, but for its courage. It unveiled a systemic problem, proving that what happened to my home was not an isolated incident. There were public forums, interviews, even a few investigative journalists picking up the thread. And then, the most remarkable thing happened. Because of the awareness my book generated, several other historically significant sites, previously targeted for demolition, were saved. My truth, once ridiculed, now had the power to protect. My professional reputation, once tarnished by Victoria's public rebuke and Charles's betrayal, was not just restored, but elevated. I was no longer just a history professor. I was a voice, a guardian of truth, a symbol of resilience. The weight of despair lifted, replaced by a profound sense of vindication. I had lost my physical home, yes, but I had reclaimed my intellectual home, my moral compass, my very soul. Victoria, I heard, faced some scrutiny for her past projects, though she, being Victoria, managed to navigate the choppy waters. Charles, on the other hand, saw his academic career suffer. He was publicly discredited, his expert status revoked, his reputation irrevocably damaged. I felt no joy in his downfall, only a quiet, weary satisfaction that justice, in its own slow way, had been served. The bitterness I once harbored for them gradually faded, replaced by a detached understanding of the human capacity for self-interest and betrayal. They were part of a chapter one had closed, a lesson learned. My heart is no longer broken, though the scars remain, subtle reminders of a time when I almost lost myself entirely. I have rebuilt my life, not on the fragile foundation of a manipulative relationship, but on the bedrock of truth, integrity, and passion. I still walk the streets of Philadelphia, but now, when I look at an old building, I see not just its history, but its potential future, and I know I played a part in safeguarding it. I am no longer Samuel, the naive academic. I am Samuel, the survivor, the truth teller, the guardian. I lost my last refuge, but in doing so, I found myself, and in that, I found a new, stronger, and more authentic sanctuary. The journey was agonizing, but the liberation, the healing, and the quiet power of reclaimed truth have made me whole again.